Good morning. This is Open Journal, KPFT's experiment in community-inspired radio. Every weekday at 8 a.m., KPFT brings you a look at the people and ideas that make the Gulf Coast great. Right after Jim Hightower's Common Sense commentary, we welcome guests sharing their knowledge, topics of interest here and globally, and the signature arts and culture that have always been a part of 90.1 KPFT. We welcome your participation throughout the program on social media. Find us on Twitter at KPFT and on Facebook at KPFT Houston. Thanks for listening and stay tuned.
Hey, good morning. You're tuned to the Open Journal on KPFT, 90.1 FM in Houston, Texas, the mighty 90, kpft.org online, listener-sponsored, commercial-free, independent, local public radio right here for you. It is Wednesday, December 3, and I'm Dwayne Bradley.
And I'm Marlo Blue, and if you're a TV watcher, well, the mid-season finale of television's most-watched program was Sunday. And all but a few may already know that the show isn't an idyllic family ensemble or sitcom, but a horror fantasy yarn based on a comic book. That's right. The Walking Dead has signaled, and if you don't already know it yet, the ascendancy of fantasy and science fiction into the mainstream. Our guest today is Stewart Hardwick. He's here today to talk about science fiction and more.
I'm sorry, but I am but a few. I am a big science fiction fan, and I am not into zombies. But we'll talk about that soon. Stewart Hardwick.
We've been talking about it all day. Science fiction. Love it. In the realms of science fiction and fantasy, well, they've just become more popular than ever, as far as I can tell. And our guest this morning, Stewart Hardwick, has lived a life where such themes have been an active part of his everyday world.
So he was born in South Dakota, but he lives in Houston.
Yay.
And he got into computer programming, eventually got a gig working with John Carmack, the future creator of the now legendary futuristic video games Doom and Quake. I'm sure you are familiar with those. A successful career for him in software meant plenty of writing, and Stewart was led to his love of the craft and a renewed dedication to the sort of tales that had filled the prairie of his childhood with magic.
His short story, Rainbows for Other Days, is included in the anthology L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future, Volume 30. It's a collection of writings and illustrations from the winners of a competition aimed at highlighting emerging writers. Welcome, Stewart.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
Thanks for emerging.
Yeah.
Tell us about the emergence. What was that process like?
Well, I grew up in a household filled with stories. I often say my mother used to tell family stories that sounded like they were written by John Steinbeck. I used to picture them, in sepia tones and everything. And so we always had stories, and we were always making radio dramas, me and my sister, and recording them on all reel-to-reel tapes, and had a lot of fun doing that. And then you grow up and you get a real job, right? And when I was growing up, a real job meant either you could go work in the oil fields in Louisiana, or you could do something with those newfangled computers. So I took the computer route. And as you described so wonderfully there, had a lot of success doing that. But along the way, I started doing more and more technical writing. And for SoftDisk, I did some editorial writing and revising, and I enjoyed that very much. And as I did more of the technical writing, I really enjoyed communicating with people, doing training and that kind of things, where I felt like I was actually accomplishing something. John Carmack and the gamer guys, as I called them, I used to hear them in the next office, and I'd hear them say, "That's not a bug, that's a feature," and they'd all laugh, which is great if you're a game. But I love being able to solve problems for people and really reach people. So about 10 years ago, I came back to these stories that were still floating around in my head, and I thought, I should do something with that and do something creative. And so I was walking to lunch one day and just started thinking about a story, and I just stopped right where I was and started writing. Well, if I really was going to write this, not just have the story floating around, but if I was really going to make it a story that people would want to read, what would I do? And I eventually got back to work that day.
You had an aha moment.
I had an aha moment. That ended up being 33,000 words that went in the dustpan, but communicated to me that I had a lot to learn.
Yeah.
So I went back. I actually enrolled in an extension course or a graduate certificate program at UC Berkeley through their extension service, and took a lot of courses there and just started writing. And
I love the fact that you took a course. We've talked a lot about how people get to where they want to be, and taking an online course from UC Berkeley, that's great, right?
well, I had to take a course because I'm not that smart. So
You were smart enough to take the course. That's the important part, though, right?
well, I was smart enough to see that there are a lot of people like me who want to be a writer, and in order to get anywhere in a competitive field, you have to be nice to people, you have to have talent, and you have to have the skills.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have much control over the talent, but I have control over the skills.
Well, of course, now you told me earlier that you did a lot of technical writing, and you still do technical writing. Do you find yourself in the middle of a project just going, wait, I need to get back to my sci-fi, or
I do, actually.
does one feed on the other?
When one thing is burdening you down, it's nice to have other activities in your life that can provide a little balance. I like on your sign on the wall there, it says, as long as I can create, I am free. And I think that's why a lot of people in corporate America are driven to write as a sideline. But technical writing is fun too, and as I was telling you earlier, I used to joke when I became a software architect that my favorite programming language was the most powerful programming language ever developed, PowerPoint.
I love that.
I have an aversion to PowerPoint. I've taken too many classes or gone to too many seminars where the presenter will put a slide up on a PowerPoint screen and then proceed to read it to you. It's one of the worst delivery methods.
No.
But when well done by someone with skill, or someone who has developed skill, as opposed to just, let me type this card and throw it up on the screen and then read this card to you. It's like, oh, God.
Well, there's a real difference between like what I call technical writing and fiction. In technical writing, you have a certain set of information in your brain, and you want to reconstruct it precisely in the audience's brain. And when you're writing fiction, that's not the right mindset at all. It's more like impressionist painting. You want to illustrate the story and let the reader fill in the details. And their details will never be the same as yours, but to them, they'll be better and more real. And so that took a certain amount of adjustment.
I like that. So I also like the fact that you grew up in an atmosphere where your mom was like your John Steinbeck, and that alone paints a great picture in my head. Just to take that track a little further along, when it wasn't your mom painting these pictures in your mind, and as you got into science fiction, who were some of those, mainly guys, in terms of the seminal influences on you? I know for me, growing up, I'm old, so it was like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells and Ray Bradbury and Arthur C. Clarke and others. But what did you find on your path into science fiction as attraction?
Well, we had 2 TV channels in my house, and every room had a bookshelf. So probably a lot of influences that I don't even remember. But certainly Asimov and Clarke. One of the earliest specific stories that I remember having an impact on me, though, was a short story written by Robert Heinlein called A Tenderfoot in Space. It was actually published in Boy's Life magazine back in the 1950s, when we didn't know yet that we still called Venus the sister planet to Earth. We thought it was going to be a habitable planet. And in his story, this father gets transferred to Venus, and of course I was in a military family, so I could identify with that. And the story is about the little boy finding a way to get his dog to Venus and creating the first Boy Scout troop on Venus. And what touched me about it is that, it's a science fiction story, but it's really the story of a boy and his dog.
Aww.
And I try to always anchor my stories, whatever they may be about, to some kind of human story, because to me, all stories are about people. Even if it's a story about a cyborg or a computer program or a machine, it still has to be a person.
Absolutely. I like that.
Speaking of which, and I'm sorry this is completely off subject, but of course the Japanese aeronautics have launched what is it called? The Hayabusa 2? Go into an asteroid to pick up more dirt. I love all the new things that are coming out about space exploration. And how much does what's going on currently actually affect what you write?
Well, I probably more than I realize.
Yeah.
I don't often see the news and think, oh, that would make a great story, because if I have that thought, a lot of other people will have that thought. I'm probably more likely to take inspiration from some comment that a friend makes that sounds poetic or something. But it does influence the genre in general. I mean, like the Tenderfoot in Space, it'd be hard to pull off a story like that today because we know what Venus is. I've actually had a thought of writing, I'd like to write some comedy. I have the idea, I'd love to write like Blade Runner meets The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming. That would be my idea.
Wow.
And one of the things that you can do is just take a step into fantasy and say, okay, as we find out more and more about the universe, a lot of our sci-fi dreams, maybe they're not really possible anymore. But if they were, maybe Venus has been inhabited all along, and it's all a great conspiracy. See, that's
can't
the
see
ticket.
that dimension.
Exactly.
Do you purposefully isolate yourself away from current events, or?
Oh no. And I when I first started writing, I had the idea I would avoid reading other science fiction because I didn't want to imitate it. And then as I gained more confidence as a writer, I don't worry about that anymore because I can do it better anyway. That's not really true. But
Stewart?
you get to where you have a voice and you have your way of telling stories. And it's funny, sometimes when I tell my story ideas to coworkers, they'll say, "Oh, that's like this." And they think that's a dig. They think, well, it's like, oh, you're retreading, well plowed territory. But in fact, as a writer, you want to be able to describe your story as like something known but different.
Yeah.
Because that gives a potential buyer something to latch onto. And even if you come up with something that's truly revolutionary, which is what every writer dreams for, you still want to be able to present it that way. You still want to be able to tie it to things that are known and understandable.
Yeah, finding your audience, man. It's really all about that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it harder these days to do that? I'm sorry.
I think it is. In some ways, this is a better time to be a writer than ever because there are more opportunities. We have better tools. We have wonderful editing software and whatnot. But on the other hand, that makes it easier for people who in previous eras might not have attempted to put their foot in. So your competition today is virtually everyone. Every other person you meet wants to be a novelist, right? And so it is a bit arrogant, for me to sit here and say I'm going to be a writer, knowing that so many other people who, so many of whom are my friends, are trying to do the same thing. But we're all in it together, and the way I put it is you can't be you have to have a thick skin because you're going to get rejection from everybody, from all directions. Even when you're established, there simply isn't a market, for example, for all the short stories that all the writers in the world, all the established writers in the world can produce. So you have to have a thick skin. You have to be like the guy on the landing craft on D-Day whose lieutenant tells him 2 out of 3 of you guys aren't leaving this beach alive. And he turns to the guy to his left and he turns to the guy to his right and he says, "You poor sons of bitches." But you can't be a jerk about it because we're still all in the boat together.
Right. So. Wow. So how did you go about developing the thick skin? What was that process like for you? I mean, were you born that way? Were you blessed with a thick skin, or did you have to grow it over time?
I definitely had to grow it over time. In fact, if I had started writing when I was in school, I probably would have stopped for that reason, because I didn't have a thick skin. Part of my secret was I just waited until I was a little bit further on in life, and I'd had my kids, and I'd, had the cats ignore me for 20 years, and you learn after a while, and then to get in a point in your life where you have enough confidence where when somebody gives you critique, you're going to look at it seriously and see what you can learn from it, but not let it take the wind out of your sails. And I think that's what I'm pretty good at doing.
So that's constructive criticism in its best form, where you're taking the constructive part and not focusing just on the criticism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one thing that helps is nowadays there are a number of online critique groups where writers help each other in exactly that way. It used to be if you wanted to write, the only way you could really get feedback was to get together with the local writers. And of course, in Houston, that would be a nightmare for most of us because of the traffic. So online, you can do that, and you can develop a relationship with people who you work well together, and you critique their stuff, and they critique your stuff.
Mm-hmm. And that's like a guilt-free criticism zone. There's
well, it's supposed to be. When it's not, you don't deal with those people anymore.
Yeah.
We're sitting here talking with C. Stewart Hardwick. Very happy to have you, author and novelist. C. Stewart Hardwick. What a great name. It just sounds like a sci-fi writer's name. It really does to me. And, of course, you won something that is really something that people covet. They really want to be a part of this. That is the L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future volume. How did you get involved with that?
Well, the Writers of the Future contest was founded in 1983, and it's become the most prestigious award for, I guess, unpublished short science fiction in the world. So I knew about it because all science fiction writers know about it. Yeah. Plus, I've seen the anthologies in the stores for years, back when there were stores. And so when I started writing seriously when I was at Berkeley, I was kind of working on my first novel as a learning exercise that I kind of knew it wasn't going to go to prime time. So I started working on short stories as an aside. And this contest was free, and I knew that if you got far enough in the contest, you could get back some professional feedback. So I really entered to get the feedback. I never thought I'd win, but I entered 3 times. The second story got an honorable mention and was later published in an Australian magazine. My third entry won.
Wow.
And I was just completely dumbfounded by this. I have to say there's got to be a certain amount of luck in that, but I'll take the credit.
So you have the fame. How about the fortune? Has that followed?
Well, they do buy your story, and
Yes.
there is a small prize. But the main thing is they put you on a plane and fly you out to Hollywood for a week-long writers conference.
Hollywood.
And that was amazing. You have all the heroes that I grew up reading. The judges are Larry Niven and let's see, I got a list here. Todd McCaffrey, Christine Catherine Rush, Robert Silverberg, Dean Wesley Smith, whose pen name is just as long as mine, by the way. Kevin J. Anderson. This year, Orson Scott Card taught one of our days. One of the instructors was Tim Powers, who wrote On Stranger Tides, which inspired the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. I mean, you can't get any better than that.
And bringing back the question, do you have to have 2 first names in order to be a sci-fi writer?
You do not.
So as an award winner in this, do you now have kind of a standing invitation? Like you win the Masters, you can play that the rest of your life.
Ooh.
So you win the Writers of the Future Award in every subsequent gala, maybe not them paying to send you there, but if you, say, showed up, they'd let you in?
Well, there are actually some winners who go back in subsequent years and kind of help out the rookies. And if they ask me, I might do that at some point in the future. Beyond that, it's a nice plastic medal that I can set on my on myself. But it's nice. My wife takes my writing a lot more seriously now. That's good. The dog, not so much.
What's your writing process like? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and have to get up and do it? Do you, as some, take it as a serious job and you have to bank a certain number of hours? Like, I get up every day and from 7 till noon I type with a break for tea at 9:30. Or is it more of a free-flowing thing that just comes to you and like you're walking down the sidewalk and you stop for a little while and jot down notes? How do you go through
It's really a serious job. You have to allocate time for certain activities. And when you're in the flow, obviously, then you have those situations where it's 2 o'clock in the morning and your wife is wondering where you are. But most of the time, it's allocate out a certain amount of time. And I'm more of a plotter. I try to plan what I'm going to write, at least for longer works. And boy, that's a challenge, to find out how to combine that structured approach with the creativity. And sometimes you just have to jot back and forth, plan for a while and then write a few scenes and see what ideas come to you.
That's fascinating. Who are you reading now?
Who am I I'm reading anthologies of winning stories right now because I find they're very inspiring. But I recently read Andrew Weir's The Martian, which is this astronaut gets marooned on Mars. It's kind of implausible premise, but once it gets going, he just runs straight through to the end. And what I love about it is all beginning writers are constantly preached at show, don't tell. And basically, The Martian is nothing but 300 pages of tell because there's no other way to convey the story. And it was a rip-roaring story. And it was actually published as an independent and then picked up by one of the big four publishers. And it's going to be made into a movie now. So
wow,
it can be done.
Yeah.
Way to go, Andrew.
Hope.
Well, you're tuned to the Open Journal here on KPFT, listener-sponsored, commercial-free, independent community radio, your local Pacifica radio station right here, public radio at its finest. See Stewart Hardwick in the studio with me, Dwayne Bradley, and Marlo Blue, and we are having just a jolly old time here. I was hoping we could prevail upon you, Stewart, to maybe share a little excerpt of your award-winning short story from the L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future, Volume 30.
I'd be happy to.
Would love that. Thank you.
So the premise of the story is it's like post-dystopian, and there's this cyborg ranger who's charged with restoring the Earth, and he's found this young lady who has escaped from the Citadel, where all the humans are kind of stored until the Earth has been repaired. And he is while she recovers, he's painting a picture of her, and you don't really quite find out why until the end of the story, but it's related to he is controlled by having his memory erased. So in this scene, he's just about to take her up to continue working on the painting. It says, "I've just set out the easel, so to cheer her, I carry her up to the overlook. As I climb, the forest canopy draws flat, wrapping the hillsides in a ruffled sea that expands to encompass the horizon. She looks around, clearly pleased. This is as outside as she can likely conceive within the confines of natural human senses. A rattle sounds nearby, and she eagerly looks for its source. Diamondbacks have been moving into the hills along the edge of the preserve, attracted by the growing rodent population. One has found its way onto the warm, exposed rocks of the overlook, and in response to our arrival has coiled itself defensively. Despite this warning and mine, though, the girl ambles over as soon as I set her down. She bends and reaches as if to stroke the serpent's head. It rattles and strikes, but I strike faster. I snatch it behind the jaw, holding it while she gawks. The outside is full of dangers, I say, tossing the snake out over the treetops. I've been engineered to survive. You have not. The sun has slipped into the hills behind us. She stares east toward the purple sky and the last of the sour rain. She sees the rainbow, perhaps her first, and draws a startled breath. Then make me like you. What a horrific thought. She stands there, blue-eyed, pink-skinned, frail and weak. The waning light passes through her cheeks so easily I can map her blood vessels without resorting to scans. But she's truly alive, stubborn as the owl holding out through the rain for her choice of fresh-killed fish, fierce as the coyote fighting for scraps around the poison seeps. 4 billion years of wild perfection, and she's asking to be cut up and domesticated by the same fools who so ruined the earth most of it is unfit for her to walk on. The same fools who sent robots to explore other worlds and turned their sons into robots like me to police this one. You don't know what you ask, miss. Don't you want to help me? My duty is to the biosphere, of which she is but one part. I am a ranger. I won't go back. If I were only a robot, then something terrible will happen. I follow her gaze to the rainbow, a nearly perfect semicircle stretching across the clouds. She sees 7 distinct bands of color. I see the continuum, about 16,000 gradations at this resolution, with an ugly line where the UV sensor doesn't mesh with the visible band. I can track a bee through the forest by the heat of its wing muscles, but I can no longer see the rainbow, not as she does, not as a human being.
Well, Stewart, thank you for that. And see Stewart Hardwick, Rainbows for Other Days. It's a great winner. Thank you for reading that for us, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Well, thanks for being a part of this morning's program. I'm Dwayne Bradley, and although we're wrapping up here, your feedback is encouraged. We're always available. Find us on Facebook at KPFT Houston and at KPFT on Twitter.
I'm Marlo Blue, and if you missed any part of this program, you can always hear it again via the on-demand link at kpft.org. And we also offer links to the discussion, song of the day, and calendar. Again, that's kpft.org.
Come on back to Open Journal tomorrow. Our guest is Jackie Wallace from the Houston Zoo. All right, on deck next, it's Exploration with Dr. Michio Kaku. I know C. Stewart Hardwick will be paying rapt attention because today's program, Doctors Carl Zimmer and Robert Hagen are discussing evolution on Earth and life in outer